Welcome everybody to the Wealthonomics Society. I'm your host, Gustavo Pinheiro. I'm manning it up by myself today. My boy Rudy is in the background, helping out. So today I'm excited because we're going to be talking about a lot of different things. And so when I've spoken to, really successful entrepreneurs, high-level executives, coaches, and so there's a different aspects to wealth. So a lot of times people think that wealth is just simply about getting income. The interesting thing about it is that, yes, that's important, but that's only one spoke on the rim. And in the 5-day challenge, we're going to go through all these other aspects that are really important. But one of the things that we fail to realize is that when we're troubled with certain things in our lives, especially around our health, wealth of income doesn't seem to matter so much. And let me share something with you. And some of you may know already what my story, but I was, it was 2011. I was on top of the world, and my business was booming. My wife was with baby, pregnant in tow, and we decided to go to Asia. And the interesting thing about that was that it was my first time there, and obviously I don't speak the language. And so when we meet up with some friends for dinner, and I order some food, and I'm excited because finally I found someone who actually speaks the language, and I order some pho. And so some of you don't know this is like this Vietnamese soup, and if you're like me, you like your stuff spicy, right? So I love mine. So I busted out the sriracha and I put a lot of spice in it. And then, I go eating and we're talking, and then my buddy goes, he leans in and goes, "Speak up, I can't hear you. Speak up, I can't hear you." And after I didn't think anything of it, thinking maybe I just put too much sriracha, right? So a month and a half passed by, I'm back in the States, and all of a sudden my voice was still a little raspy. Sounded like if I was going through puberty. So I'm like, maybe there's something wrong. Let me just check out. Nothing really thinking anything of it. So I go on the Google machine, right? And it says, if you have the certain symptoms, of course, if you ever did that, you always have all the symptoms, right? So I go on the Google machine and it says, if you have these XYZ symptoms, you should go to an ENT, an ear, nose, throat doctor. Okay, so I set up an appointment. I go to my ENT, and then the doctor goes in, and she goes in, she says, "You know what, Mr. Pinheiro, I'm going to have to scope you." I didn't know what the heck that meant. She sprays some numbing agent in my nose, and she pulls out this long hose with the light and the camera at the end. And she goes, "I'm going to put this up your nose." And she goes up my nose, down the back to my throat. Now, if it sounds disgusting and it sounds painful, it's actually worse. And so she goes there and she does her scope and her tests, and she goes, "Well, I'm gonna have to do some further tests. Come back in." And so we go, and still not thinking anything of it, thinking that this is just kind of normal protocol, So we go and get the test. She calls me to come back in with the test results. This time around, I come in with my wife, and we're sitting in the waiting room, and we're just kind of laughing and giggling, just trying to come up with names for our soon-to-be born son. And I say, "Mr. Pinheiro, it's your turn." So they call me, and I go into the examination room. And then we're sitting there, and the doctor comes in. But it was kind of strange the way she walked into the room, because when she walked in, all I remember was seeing her back. It was kind of like how she slid around and she shut the door. When she turned around, though, it was as if she saw a ghost. She sits down next to me. She places her hand on my knee, and she tells me, "Mr. Pinheiro, I'm sorry. You have cancer." In that moment, the world just shrunk. And that walk from the examination room to the parking lot was the longest walk of my life. All I could just do was hug my wife and cry. And I realized that there's a warrior in me, and I realized that there's a lot of things, and that there was something greater in me than I knew myself to be. I drew on all the experiences that I had in life, from growing up in the hood and dodging gunshots and jumping over people passed out from the night's activities before. And, and just even graduating college, there was something in me that had me persevere. But I needed to understand about wealth around my health. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Because when you have wealth of money, that's only one spoke on the rim. But the challenge is this, is that, there's an old adage that says you will expend all your health to gain your financial wealth, and then you'll expend all your financial wealth to gain your health back when you get older. And I didn't want to be that statistic. So I realized that, wealth of health was something that's indicative. That's going to mean the difference of something as simple as you being able to climb a flight of stairs, or God forbid, if you're in an emergency situation, if you could carry somebody and help save their life, And so one of the things that I learned is that, develop in terms of developing healthy habits, we want to make sure that we follow a certain fitness routine, And obviously, one of the things when I was battling cancer, the first thing that I did was I learned how to eat healthier. I actually enrolled in a place that's down here in Florida, and I learned for 3 weeks how to eat right. Believe it or not, we don't know how to eat right. We eat too many processed foods and whatnot. And so I went on a whole food vegan diet. And that's actually something a little challenging to have on your day to day. But because I was basically battling this with everything, I wanted to build up my immune system. So I did whatever it took. And, I had to practice a certain amount of self-care, meaning that, hey, I'm not going to eat that sandwich or that dessert that's going to spike up my sugar and that cancer wanted it. I was cognizant of what I was doing. I knew that there was a few things done in my research that I knew that when I was dealing with cancer was that, cancer hated clean environments. They love acidic environments. They love sugary environments, and they love that the pH in your body is very high. And so, very low. And so what I was trying to do was trying to change everything around that, change my pH in my body, making sure that my body was oxygenated. So I did a lot of exercise, I did a lot of cardio, because cancer didn't like that. Cancer didn't like having an oxygenated environment. So one of the things why I keep bringing this up, and I don't want to focus just on cancer, but just for using that as an example, was that because when we start looking at health, we don't realize what we are mistakenly taking for granted over and over again until it actually escapes us. You know what I mean? And so when we start talking about different things about life, and we start talking about not only health, but we start talking about and I kind of foreshadowed this, was that one of the first things I had to do when I was dealing with my health was that I had to educate myself. I had to make sure that, that I got the proper information. I wasn't just taking hearsay. And it was something that I guess I took from my experiences of being, in the laboratory, as a scientist, whatever, that I was I didn't just take what someone said for granted. I had to do my own research and then couple that with what the information that was being dissipated out. And so when we start talking about education, here's a slippery slope that I want to forewarn you on. Sometimes when we get into the place of education, we think that we need to take in a lot of knowledge, right? So some of you that may be looking after obtaining wealth financially, what we go to is we take what we don't know and we take a lot of time getting a lot of knowledge. And then we become the so-called pseudo expert. We can regurgitate the information and say what it was and what it wasn't. But then what we end up finding out is that we're no further along, except that we're just like parrots, for lack of a better word, that are just saying what we just kind of did, but we don't know how to apply it. And so when we talk about education, we got to be very careful depending on the objective of what we're trying to do when we're seeking out wealth. Because education, what ends up happening is that when we're so focused on education, it'll actually could at certain times put us in a space of paralysis. And so there's an old adage that says paralysis of analysis. And so I can't tell you, like when I was venturing into the world of real estate and starting doing my investments and helping out and analyzing deals, there was sometimes not only me, but some of my cohorts, they would just get stuck. And I would get stuck because I'm looking at the numbers this way, I'm looking at the numbers that way, I'm looking at it sideways. But in the reality, I had the answer within the first 10 minutes of analyzing that deal, whether it was a good deal or not. And so sometimes if you find yourself like analyzing something so much that you're trying to force it to work out, chances are you have paralysis analysis. It's like you talk yourself into it and then you talk yourself right out of it. How many of you out there have done that? Or am I the only one, right? I've talked myself into so many things that I talked myself right out of it. Understanding that is that your education is just to help you come to a decision, a choice, whether to go left or go to right. And sometimes we know the answer, and either we try to force ourselves to go another direction, or we force ourselves to try to come to a conclusion that may not necessarily be there. For example, like when I was looking at houses, I would analyze the deal. Do the numbers make sense? Does the area make sense? What are the comparable sales? How much repairs I have to have? And when I started looking at that, I realized that, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole. And then you start trying to tell yourself a story around, well, what's going on with the seller? Why is this seller selling this way? What's happening? You at least for me, I would try to get into the mindset of what's happening to the seller just to better understand the situation. And sometimes I would waste so much time on that part of my education that I'd realize that, you know what? About 30 minutes ago or about an hour ago, I had the answer, but I was forcing it to happen. So when you start looking at elevating your education, you want to seek not only new knowledge, but you want to seek knowledge to the point where you can actually make a choice in whatever it is that you're looking to seek that knowledge in, and definitely, once you've mastered that, there's that whole adage of like giving back. So you teach others, but I skipped a spot. I skipped a step. And this is the step that most people do. They attain knowledge and then they want to teach others. But there's one crucial step that goes right in between that. And that's actually finding a mentor. So when I went into real estate for the very first time, what I was doing was this, is that I knew a lot. I had a lot of textbooks. I was the self-help, self-taught guru, but that didn't help me apply it. And the moment that I got a mentor where I could bounce ideas, where I could understand how to structure deals, who can foresee the mistakes that I was making initially, that's when my business took off. That's when when I was able to ask those one-on-one questions. I remember there was times that I would call my mentor up, and I don't know how he never hung up the phone on me. I would call my mentor up not one, not two, not three, not 4 times a day. I would call him up 10, 15 times a day. And I'm not talking about back to back. It was throughout the whole day. There was times that he would spend 20 minutes with me going over a contract and say, see, this is the part you're going to understand. You got to understand this. You got to do that. And I thought I did my due diligence, right? I thought I was good because I read the contract. I highlighted. I was trying to be the best student. I was like, yes, I know, understand what this means. And he goes, well, do you know what checking this box means? And I was dumbfounded. And, so when I got through that process, I was able to not only lightning speed, because all this is like, if you want to transform your life, right? If you want to transform your life, and that's probably like, so let me backtrack a second because I'm getting ahead of myself. The question that's most often asked of me, is this: how do I change my life right now? And my answer to that is this, is that you got to understand the importance of having a mentor to get you from point A to point B. Even like the greatest sports hero, you talk about Michael Jordan, he had a coach. All the greatest people have coaches. And the reason why is because they will be able to see, hear, and feel things that you're not able to do in your day-to-day. I'm an advocate of yoga. I'm not sure of how many of you guys out there do yoga. And that was one of the things after I started taking care of my health was that's one of the things I love to do. But I can look in the mirror all day long and I could go in certain positions, right? But until I have a teacher that slightly adjusts me and makes those slight modifications to me and say, oh, you're doing this slightly wrong. And then I could really understand how I need to engage myself in what I'm trying to achieve. So that's very key. When you have a coach or a mentor, especially when we try to talk about transforming your life, it's important that you have somebody that can engage you and make those slight adjustments. So one of my favorite mentors was Tony Robbins, and I remember this sticks with me to this very day. He used an example that was so amazing, and he says that what is the difference that to make a difference in your future? How much change do you have to make today? How much change do you have to make today? And he goes like this. He pinches his fingers. It seemed like he was pinching as tight as he can. He goes, this is how much change you need to make. And that stuck with me. And the reason why it stuck with me because he goes, because over time, the trajectory of where you were going to be at and where you are right now makes that big of a difference. Because when you start going over time, that little bit of space will make the difference of whether or not you are where you're at right now, or you could transform your life. And I stuck with that. And when I started to try to make changes in my health, when I started to make changes in making different educational decisions, when I started to make different financial decisions, it all started with a slight change. Because little changes make big changes. Little changes make big changes. So over time, you can transform your life. So I'm here to tell you today that, I know that we're looking at the 5-day challenges coming to answer that very question. That question I was telling you that most people ask me, how do I make change today? Well, that's the reason why I developed the 5-day challenge, to answer those questions, to put you within the spotlight of the blind spots that you may not be looking at when you're trying to attain your wealth. And that is my way of giving back to the community. I wholeheartedly hope that you decide that you take the initiative and you see the URL there, tinyurl.com/5dayswealth. That is where we're going to go. You sign up there, and if you want to do the VIP and you're fancy, you can actually look at my screen and you can take a photo and it'll take you to the VIP. I highly encourage this. You're making an investment in yourself. You're making an investment in yourself where you'll see that there's going to be things that we're going to be breaking down. It's kind of like a coach breaking down the plays for Michael Jordan. That's what we're going to be doing. So today, I highly encourage you, and we're going to be wrapping this up. I just want to come in. The challenge starts Monday, and it goes from Monday to Friday of next week, May 22nd to May 26th, starting at 7 o'clock. And so I look forward to seeing you there. Rudy, you could take us out if you're there. I think that